you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and generous and faithful God, we thank you for bringing us here again this week. We thank you for all of the blessings that you pour out on our lives and all of the grace that you give us to face the challenges that we confront. I thank you for being here, for all of us being here this morning, and pray that you would lead and guide our conversation this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I also want to ask everyone to keep the families, friends of all those who were affected by the truck bombing in Somalia last night. Pretty devastating attack. Considered the largest truck bombing in history. 200 or so were killed, and another couple hundred were injured. So just pray for peace and healing in that region of the world. Just to reflect on our journey, this is our fourth segment of a four-part series on God's plan for money and finance. We started off our first week discussing the ownership of all by God and the provision of all by God, and the fact that our correct response to God's provision is to gratitude, thanks, and for stewardship of what He has entrusted to our care. We moved into week 2 and we talked about making money, the biblical principles surrounding both work and our place on earth and our duty to work, and that being our part of our design for what we're here to do, as well as for biblical principles for investing and for saving and for planning for the future.
Insurance,
retirement funds, insurance, those kinds of things. Not leaving a burden for our children, but preparing them to be able to do kingdom work by not saddling them with debt. We also discussed, and in week 3 we started talking about spending, which of course is it's always the hard part, to use those dollars that God provides to prayerfully discern how we're spending our money, to make sure that is serving Him and not just serving our worldly desires. We also talked about started getting into some of Dave Ramsey's principles in terms of how to manage spending. We talked about the fact that debt is slavery, and also puts us in a hostile relationship with our fellow man when we are a borrower and our fellow man's a lender, breeds resentment, and we want to be free of debt. So that aspect. We also started getting into Dave Ramsey's the baby steps. And we didn't really talk much, but we talked briefly about the baby steps and the debt snowball, but didn't get into a lot of detail on it. We'll get more into that today. Actually, I guess that's where we should segue, is just to get back into, we've talked mostly about the biblical study, but we wanted to touch some on the practical and the Dave Ramsey pieces. And so, what do you want to talk about first? That snowball? Actually, that started with the baby steps in general. We didn't really talk about the fact that Dave Ramsey has what's called the baby steps. And the reason he calls them the baby steps is that, especially when a family who's been living unintentionally and not necessarily following biblical principles with spending, clearly there's going to be a debt issue. And so looking at that debt and saying, where do I start? It can be very scary. It can be very hard to even get your mind around how to tackle debt. And so Dave Ramsey calls it what he calls baby steps. You can't tackle that whole thing in one fell swoop. He recommends that you take steps. And the first step was The first step, the first step was the emergency fund. So there are actually 7 baby steps. The first is the emergency fund. I Melanie talked a lot about the emergency, a little bit about it last week. So he recommends $1,000 in an emergency fund. This is obviously so if there's a paycheck timing issue, if there's a car repair, if there's some unexpected, and there are always, we say unexpected expenses, like car repairs are not really unexpected. So if you're building a family budget, and this is another aspect of both Crown and Dave Ramsey, is to have a family budget and to look at your expenses. There are lots of things that people think of as unexpected that are really expected. If you own a car, you will have car repairs. So we should be...
And like gift giving, a lot of times people will say like, oh, Christmas. And he's like, that is not unexpected. It happens every year. You should be planning throughout the year, putting aside a little bit each month or however you need to do it so that it's not this huge, how am I going to get gifts for my kids?
Your children have a birthday every year. It's, unexpected birthday gift. No, there's a birthday every year. So obviously building a budget, if there's not a line in the budget for those gifts, then you're not being, you're not really planning for those. You're not planning for that. So $1,000 in the emergency fund. The next step was the pay off all debt except the house. So all debt except the home mortgage, using the debt snowball. Melanie talked about that last week. The debt snowball was you start with the smallest debt, and then you pay that off with what Dave Ramsey calls gazelle-like intensity. And then you get that paid off, and then after you get that paid off, you go to the next largest debt, and you weigh into that. And then with each victory of closing out an account, now Dave would also be saying you're cutting up the credit cards. So you're not adding to debt. So the first thing is stop the bleeding. So make sure that the budget the budget falls within resources and then has room for making these debt payments. And then after tackling that first, the smallest debt, then the next largest, all the way up to the final unsecured debt. Once you get past the debt, then it's about saving. So the first is to have 3 to 6 months of expenses in savings. So Melanie did briefly mention this, that what happens if there's a job loss, what happens if any number of things, short-term disability, that having 3 to 6 months of expenses in savings provides for security against those kinds of events.
You don't want to have made the progress on steps 1 through 3 and then be back where you want to work towards having that security so that you don't end up having to draw on debt if there is a loss in income or maternity leave that's unpaid or something like that.
The next step he recommends is to invest 15% of household income into Roth IRAs and pre-tax retirement plans. So again, planning for retirement. Obviously, if you have employer-provided retirement benefits that you control, that like if the employer goes under, that you're not without. Some employers have their own retirement fund, and if the company goes out of business, your retirement goes away. That's not nearly as secure as having your retirement independently held outside of the company. It's a company pension.
And this is the same logic flows to why you do the life insurance separate from your company. You don't want it to be dependent on your employment, obviously, in case there's a change or anything. You want your life insurance to be separate. Not that you can't have some with your employer. Like when I worked, I had a policy with my employer, but then I also had the bigger one that was meant truly to be the replacement of my monetary value to our family in terms of taking care of our children and things if something were to happen to me. And then
we do that too with me. I mean, we have
right.
the state, we have 3 or 4 times annual salary that the state offers. That's like every year you're with the state, they like give you another free year of, you have the opportunity to buy another year of, another times your annual salary without additional underwriting. So if you can pick it up without underwriting, it's like, sure, why not? It's a low premium.
Right, yes, but you definitely want your main one to be independent of your employer. And then for the retirement, and just remember we talked about that, how if you have 15% going into retirement, I mean, that's like quite rare now, but there are still some employers who may do 10% or whatever. That can count towards that 15%, so it's not like you have to take whatever is the benefit that you're getting from your employer plus, 15. So that's our reality is he does get a certain portion from his employer, so we aren't having to do as much directly out of our paycheck, if that makes sense. So every situation is going to be unique depending on what your benefits are from your employer and how all those shake out. But Dave Ramsey isn't suggesting to be like super legalistic about it, like it has to come from your take-home pay. And that also goes into, is the next one saving for college?
Next is college funding.
Okay, so remember that's how I explained like in our budget, because he already has his percentage coming from his employer. We didn't really skip it, it was just already kind of handled through his benefits. And then we made college investing our priority.
And we started all this before we knew about the steps, and we probably had the steps out of order.
So it's all going to depend, again, like on your own situation and benefits and that kind of thing.
Next is step 6. After all of those other steps, pay off your home early. So get to aggressive in paying off those mortgage payments so you can pay down additional principal so that your mortgage is paid off more quickly. And
this is another parting from Dave Ramsey a little bit on this, but as a finance person, what I did when we were going through the baby steps is if you make one extra mortgage payment a year, it cuts many, many, many years off of your mortgage. So what I was doing when we were going through this is I was taking our monthly mortgage and I was taking 1/12 of our mortgage payment and adding that much on to be applied to principal, and it cut down. I mean, I did that for 5 years before we ended up moving, and I mean, it cut drastically off of our principal, and I felt like that was worth it. To me, that was a worthwhile. The amount wasn't that much on our mortgage. It was an extra like $95 a month.
Plus, like in the early goings of your mortgage, you're paying like 5 times, maybe more than 5 times.
You're almost all interest anyway. So getting that little bit off principal every month really makes a difference in the long run. Like it ended up taking off a big chunk for us. So if that's something that, again, depending on your own situation and your own mortgage, if you can do that extra 1/12 of principal applied to your debt every month on your mortgage, it makes, in the end, it takes off like 10 years. Like if you have a 30-year mortgage, it takes off like 10 to 15 years, just depending. So it's worth considering.
A second on college funding, so, and the home mortgage. So the baby steps. So what he has is that, one, it's all about levels of security, and then moving to the next step. The first thing is the $1,000 of an emergency fund, so you just don't have a critical crisis emergency thing where you can't fix the car, so you can't go to work, you lose your job, it's that kind of thing. Then, of course, it's get out of debt. You get free from having that debt obligation that is eating into the family budget for debt service. Next is the 3 to 6 months of savings for expenses. That's, again, security, so that you're taking care of your household first. Then provide for your future in terms of retirement, so that when you are at older age, which we all will, that you're not then imposing that on your children. And then finally, then after that, he talks about college funding. So I know Dave Ramsey, and this obviously not everybody feels the same way about these issues, but Dave Ramsey is perfectly okay telling his listeners that if you don't have your house in order, your kids can work and put themselves through college. That's basically his perspective on it, that it's more important to make sure that those things are taken care of and that you're not in debt, that you're not, that you don't have a retirement plan for, so that you're not then suffering through putting your children in that position later.
And there's going to be, and families are going to prioritize this differently. I mean, obviously, education for some people is going to be a higher priority than others. For us, I feel like education is a priority for us, but I feel like financially, I feel like we're pretty balanced in that we have plans for our kids. We have college investment plans for our kids, but our daughter is responsible for her own, she's at college now, and she is responsible for her own food and her own, just like if she wants to go to the movies or, so there you can, some parents would pay for everything, and I know that happens. And the kids have to pay for everything, and then you can be somewhere in the middle.
I saw her last week, and she was telling me a story about her friends. Her friends are all taking on large amounts of student loans, and they're living large. They're eating out all the time. They may be going on trips. I don't know. But they're living large on student loans, and they're settling themselves with a lot of debt. And she's like, she just can't believe watching what they're doing. She's completely like, she doesn't get it. That how they don't see that this is going to be a problem. I have a coworker whose former roommate just moved to Ohio. She was studying, I guess was a practical nurse, and then wanted to be ultimately an A.R.C or something, and then but was not yet an RN, and I think she wanted to be a PA actually, and was like applying to PA schools and couldn't get in anywhere. Kept trying. Eventually she found this program that was like a joint nursing ARNP school in Ohio, and she was able to get in. So she's gone up there to do this program. It's like she's taking out in loans something like, it's going to be a 3-year program, something like $71,000 a year in student loan debt. So she's going to leave that program, if she succeeds in the program, with like $200,000 in student loan debt. That's nuts to me. Just like,
and that would be certainly not within Dave Ramsey's advice. He would absolutely be against that. So if you have children in your lives or grandchildren, then I think that the reason that our daughter was kind of clued into some of these things that she's seeing with her peers and is wary of them is because we did require in high school for her to take Dave Ramsey. He has a course that he offers through the public school system. Do you remember the name of it, honey?
I don't.
It's something like Introduction to Financial Management. Anyway, it's offered through Florida Virtual School, and it's a requirement of all Florida graduates to take an online class through Florida Virtual School. So for her, we required that be her online class, was the Dave Ramsey Financial Literacy. I'd have to look up what the exact name of it was. But it's basically his course, his material, his concepts, but it's geared towards where they are in their life. So it talks a lot about student loans and going to college and having a checkbook and kind of some very introductory concepts for where they are in their life. And so I felt like that really did, we can say these things all day long as her parents, but having this third party that was respected, it's through Florida Virtual School, it's a class. I felt like it added credibility to the message, and we're seeing now as she's walking through this that at least some of it has stayed, thankfully.
I was very overjoyed to hear her just venting as she observed. And the venting was not, it wasn't like her friends are having all this fun and she was like feeling left out. It was like she would literally thought it was lunacy what they were doing. And I mean, I couldn't have been more proud of that moment.
Both of us took on student loans. We were not living biblical financial principles at that point in our lives, so it is gratifying when you've walked that road.
So I don't feel that bad.
When you've walked that road and made those mistakes, and you can. Is it me?
I think it's unrelated. I think it's all up there. So the last baby step is to build wealth and give. So again, getting to the end goal, which is financial freedom, to be able to then serve God's kingdom.
I did want to interject. That even though that's the last baby step, you're supposed to be giving all along. The point of the last baby step is that so more of your income is free for giving and being able to have the freedom in your schedule to volunteer in church ministries or different things. But that doesn't mean like while you're attacking your debt and all those kinds of things that you're not supposed to be giving. You absolutely are supposed to continue to keep up your charitable giving.
Has everyone seen Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List? Everyone? Schindler's List?
Oh, yeah.
So I have to conjure up a memory just of the film. So in one of the last scenes, Oscar Schindler, played by Liam Neeson, the war had the Allies have arrived. They've liberated the town. So his factory workers, who were principally Jewish, that he had been buying through bribes to the Germans, were now safe there because the Allies had arrived. They no longer had to worry about the German government, and so it's over. It's finally over, and Oscar Schindler is reflecting on the situation, and he breaks down in tears. And he's like, "I could have saved more." And he's looking at his ring or anything he had left as a possession, that he could have saved more of his Jewish workers by additional bribes to get them out. And that he felt like no matter how much he did, how inadequate his effort was. And I think that's definitely what Crown Financial Principles and Dave Ramsey are all about. Is that every time we spend $1, we're making a choice, an opportunity, there's an opportunity cost for that choice. What are we getting out of it? I mean, are we serving it? Is it serving pleasure? Is it serving just our desires? Because every $1 we spend on whatever that is not $1 that we have to make a real difference in the world. And that's what we're called as Christians to do, is to use what we've been entrusted for good, and to use it for the glory of God's kingdom. We had some.
As a practical matter, I know that this is a solid Crown piece of advice that kind of like when we talked about investing, making sure that you're to the extent able to know and investigate and have the knowledge. Make sure that you're investing in companies that use ethical practices and fair wages for their workers and all of those kinds of things. And the same goes with giving. With Crown, there's a real emphasis that as Christians, we're asked all the time. I mean, everyone's asked all the time to donate to great causes. But as Christians, we really have a call to support those ministries and services and organizations that are in line with Christian values. That there's tons of people out there who aren't believers who are going to donate to and I don't want to like single out any particular institution, but that are going to support these well-meaning but not necessarily Christian-focused groups, and that our call as Christians is that our resources, as given by God, as we believe that that we're stewards of them for God's purposes, that our focus of our giving is organizations that are furthering the message of Jesus and the gospel. Anything to add to that?
I just want to reflect on that the first segment, the first week, as we conclude this week with spending, it all goes full circle. You can't attack the debt snowball. You can't attack living with less so that you have the budget to pay down debt unless you're committed to the biblical principles. Unless you internalize that all that you have is entrusted by God and are prayerfully discerning how you're spending that dollar, unless you are, and then also taking it to prayer and seeking help to fight off the cultural messages of spend, you want this, all these things that we're being bombarded with to try to tap into our worldly desires and get us to spend the resources that God has entrusted to us. Unless we are armed in prayer, unless we're armed with a complete understanding of God's ownership, then it's impossible to start to have the intensity, the focus, to do what Dave Ramsey likes to call living on rice and beans. So,
Yes.
to living simply in order to do what has to be done to achieve those baby steps. That's completely impossible unless we're all about that first thing.
Right. For us, like I said last week, when Father Tom asked us to do this talk and mentioning Dave Ramsey, I was like, well, we personally could not talk about anything to do with finances without also talking about Crown, because it really is, it's the why. Like, why care about any of this? And it just goes back to those biblical financial principles and really digging in and knowing what our response, as Joseph likes to say, to God's generosity. And then also, I forgot when I was talking about giving, another example of giving is political contributions. I have a cousin who a couple of years ago decided he wanted to get into politics and decided to run for office. And we supported him his first go around. He didn't really have he was just kind of getting out there, didn't have like a super specific platform. He was running for state, they call it assemblyman in Nevada. Here it would be like a House member, in the legislature. Anyway, so we supported him the first time. And then as he kind of developed into his identity in politics and created kind of his platform and the things that he really was going to champion, and he came back around the second time, we just had to tell him that, I love him, he's my cousin, but we couldn't support him.
He was misguided.
Because he was misguided on some of his issues. And that was really hard. Like, I still get like a little upset, but that's another place to be mindful of where you're spending your money, is when if you donate to political candidates, knowing what they support and are going to vote for, and voting with your dollars as well as your vote.
So just some reflections we have from the book of Acts, chapter 20. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. I should have gone through these earlier. So 7 biblical principles that should influence our lifestyle. The first is learn to be content. Learn to be content. And then we have a quote from Timothy, or Philippians. And having food and raiment, that's clothing, let us be therewith content. That's Timothy. This is Philippians. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. So the first biblical guidance for lifestyles to be content. Learn to avoid coveting. Of course, we talked briefly in week 1. We asked about commandments, and one of the responses was do not covet. Exodus. Thou shalt not covet anything that is thy neighbor's. So obviously, keeping up with the Joneses is going to lead you to ruin. Do not determine your lifestyle by comparing it to others. Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. But they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves is not wise. Make an effort to live more simply. Study and strive to be quiet and to do your own business and to work with your own hands.
Isn't that just like,
Thessalonians.
when I think about some of these, that so many of them in our modern culture are so easy to fall into, because, I mean, if you think back, like Little House or something, they aren't running into their neighbors every day and seeing that, they have whatever they have. Just modern culture, I think some of these become so challenging because we are in community. We're in, if you're like on social media or whatever, you're constantly confronting these, like a practical way.
This one is huge. Success is meaningless apart from serving Jesus Christ. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world but lose his own soul? That's from Mark chapter 8. And do not be conformed to the world, Romans. Be not conformed to this world. So, all of that on lifestyle is very key. In order to attack the debt, in order to follow Dave Ramsey's baby steps, it's critical that it's a countercultural activity. You are at culture war when you are following these principles, because everything about our society is about me, buy, and to do otherwise is to be combating the culture. And I guess you should probably reflect a moment on just spiritual warfare and the fact that on this journey you're going to have attack.
Yeah, it's true. Anytime that either you're drawing yourself, you're desiring Jesus more and trying to follow him more closely, even with things, it seems, money, like, it seems like that's not like a thing where, Satan's going to want to attack you, but it's just in our lives at least, it has proven time and time again, anytime that you're drawing closer to the Lord, or especially if you're drawing others to the Lord, like if you're involved in a ministry and you're working to try to build that for other people, you're gonna come under spiritual attack. And I'll warn against the big one for me is discouragement. Discouragement is always from the devil. That is never of God. So God loves and encourages. The devil is the only one who's gonna discourage you when you're doing God's work, whether it's finances or any other topic. So just arming yourself against that through prayer, through the rosary. I cannot say enough about just the armor of praying the rosary every day, and how when I think about the times when we have had the biggest struggles in our life, financial or otherwise, I always can point to just Mary's intercession as where we usually get unknotted from that. So yes, just prayer, obviously the sacraments, the rosary, but know that that's going to come, that when you're working for God and you're focused on God, that you're going to experience spiritual warfare. And I have never been one that liked to talk about that, or it was when I would hear people say, oh, the devil, I would go, that kind of makes me nervous. But as I've grown in faith and as I've walked that myself, I have just really seen where he's on the prowl, as we say in St. Michael's Prayer.
It probably goes without saying, but we need to say it, that as hard as this would be for a single person to do on their own, if in a marriage, if one party is all about it and the other one is lukewarm, it's harder. But if one is for it and the other one is against, then it's impossible. And even better, of course, would be for at those times when we all are struggling and have moments of weakness. If your partner's on board and they're there to be your accountability partner, then there's so much more that can be achieved. So this is definitely something that for families, for married couples, it's something that has to be done together.
Yes, and also, and you can imagine with doing it in partnership, both because it's two people, because of communication, because of time and demands, that does make it very difficult and sometimes tense, but you're going to have the most success if you are working together.
Let's see if I can, see how common, see if this bumper sticker or t-shirt is as common as I think it is. Fill in the blank at the end of this phrase. He who dies with the most toys, blank.
You guys know who you see?
Wins. Yes, of course, everybody knows the bumper sticker. But we actually have a biblical principle that's exactly the opposite. Be not thou afraid, this is obviously older language, not the current translation. Be not thou afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. Be not thou afraid when one is made rich, when the glory of his house is increased. For when he dieth, he shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. In other words, you can't take it with you. So for those that are trying to amass things, you can't take them with you. And
I've heard people that spend money and they say, why save it? I can't take it with me. And then that gets them into debt.
Yeah. Well, it's that mentality. It's not that single, and that's the thing I think that we forget. Mm-hmm. It's not the single decision, it's the thought.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, going back to trying to really internalize and study the principles of why. Dave Ramsey is awesome for the practical application, and certainly if you're in a place where you really need some help with getting out of a hole, definitely you could start with him. But if you don't ultimately study the why, you'll end up right back there, right back in that place.
Also, Proverbs, you touched on this. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. In other words, we also have a duty not only to live these financial principles, but to teach our children those principles so that.
Yeah, and even though you teach them, that's not a promise that they're going to follow them. That is a promise that it'll always be with them. They'll always have it. They certainly have the freedom not to follow it, and to, as with anything, as they become adults, they may depart from financial wisdom, they may depart from the faith. Those are all uncomfortable. That's something I've really been pondering since we went to a conference this summer with families, and I met several families whose children had left the faith, and that is all very uncomfortable to think about, but it is a fact that we can impart these principles and anything that we want to our children, and they ultimately have to own them.
The old phrase, God has no grandchildren.
God has no grandchildren. Yeah, you do the best that you can when you have them.
They either become children of God themselves or they don't.
Yeah, and you can't control that. That's their freedom.
But we try hard.
But try hard. Do your best.
I heard it said once, you can't, let me see. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
Unless you put salt in his oats.
Natural consequences.
One thing that I've done, and it was accidental, but it's funny because I think it actually points to God's dominion, is that when our children are fighting over whatever piece of plastic they're fighting over, it's usually nothing important. This is mine, no, that's mine, this is mine, no, that's mine. I remind all of them that they own nothing, that their children, they lack legal capacity for ownership, that I own everything that they have, and that I just let them use it. Even if it was a birthday gift from somebody else, when it came into the house, even though it's theirs, not legally, it's all mine, not theirs, because they can't own. So that principle is actually, that same principle is the biblical principle. Well, actually, I don't own anything. Everything is of God. It's only what God has entrusted to me. And so it's the same principle.
And our children have plenty of things. That sounds very hard line, like he's so mean. They're fine.
Well,
But yes, that just helping them to develop that sense of just awareness. It's not important. Like take a pause.
they never fight over the important things. It's always the unimportant.
So just training them in intentionality. Just that's what all of this is about being mindful of how you're spending your money, how you're making your money. There's definitely little practical ways in family life that you can talk through and demonstrate that.
So we have about 5 minutes. We haven't had we don't have a huge audience for questions, but I'd rather react
Okay.
at this point to
Sure.
anything. We've had 4 weeks together. Anything that's come to mind or want to reflect on or talk more about?
For me, I wish I had known about it much younger in life. My late husband and I, we just kind of lived, we didn't, I don't know, we just didn't put financial planning, so to speak, as a priority for us.
Just lived unintentional.
Yeah.
Just money came in and went out,
Yeah.
and either debt was going down or debt was going up. It just
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
and you just reacted to it.
Life kind of happened to us instead of us happening to life.
So not having a plan.
Yeah, I'm in a good place now, but, I'm concerned for my kids, and they seem to be doing well. 2 of them have taken the Dave Ramsey course and everything, so we're on a good track right now.
That's good.
I don't think we ever talked about the envelope system that Dave advocates.
Yeah, about paying with cash. So Dave advocates that it hurts a lot more to spend money when it's cash versus like writing a check or using a debit card. So if you're one that struggles with overspending or kind of spending mindlessly, that you give yourself whatever your budget is for example, like coffee, coffee out. That's your budget, and then you pay with that cash, and when it's gone, it's gone. And then that it kind of trains you.
You can physically see that, well, if I'm spending something from this column, then it's not there for that column.
Right.
I think paying cash for things makes you more cognizant of your money rather than just giving them a card and putting it on.
Clearly, that's the premise, is that
Yeah.
the card system that the banks have advocated this because
There's,
one of the reasons is
they've done the research. They know that you're going to spend more
Oh, yeah.
if it's a card than cash. They're very
Eventually, you're going to pay the piper.
right. They're
Eventually.
And of course, people quibble about the cash advice that are like, well, for some people, they feel like, I have the cash and I'm going to spend it. And
Yeah.
some are like, well, you can lose the cash, then what do you do?
Yeah.
There are counterpoints.
And it's like what I said last week, when I'm in the store or something, and if I see something, I ask myself the question, do I need it or do I want it? And I walk away and think about it, and a lot of the times I walk out and say, yes, I didn't need it. And I've incorporated that in my thinking over the last year or so, and it's really made a big difference.
yes.
Big difference.
Yeah.
And like I said, for me, as far as the whole package, it all goes back to, as I'm spending, does this dollar honor God? And if it doesn't, what am I doing?
And another thing, You know, like one of Dave Ramsey's like little quips is if you don't tell your money where to go, it'll find a place. And that goes back to what you're saying, that you really have to kind of like take ownership, you know, like take charge of your finances, take charge of your money. Be like, no, we're not doing this. We're doing this. Because it will. It's like time. I mean, time and money. If you're not intentional in planning, you will spend it. Like it's going somewhere. And so kind of just having, again, that mindfulness and that plan.
I think the last job I had before I retired in 2011, I worked for Leon County Schools, and I worked in this office, the Test Development Center, and I was the office manager, but I also worked with the director and very closely with the budget, and we had a 3-year grant increments, and after 3 years it would get renewed again and everything. And we worked with a $6 million budget, and all of the directors that I worked with through the course of the 11 years I was there had very good financial mentality and everything, and I learned a lot from them, and so a lot of that trickled over into my personal life, into the household budget and everything, and I was really grateful that I was in that position, that I could pick up a lot of good financial habits and everything. I'm a firm believer of God puts you where He wants you to be. I swear by that. I mean, I just think that we're all in a place where He wants us to be. And that really helped me a lot too, working with a lot of those professionals.
That's great. That's great.
One last reflection, I think, we're getting close on time, but one of the things I wanted to reflect on at some point in the segments was, how long ago did we get crowned? It was a while.
It was about 10 years ago.
10 years ago. We haven't kept up with all the couples that we were in the crown study with, but I think we know definite examples where, back from the study, one of the things we discussed in the group was whether the couples were doing shared checking or whether they were doing separate checking. And I think that empirically, most that were doing separate checking are no longer married.
And that's something that Dave Ramsey, that's a concept that also Dave Ramsey and Crown share. Because there's some where they're a little bit different in application. But that one is one that Dave Ramsey and Crown, that if you're married, you have joint account. That's just the way it needs to be.
Well, there were an amazing number of couples, even quote-unquote faithful couples, who they have their money, I have my money, which to me is always just building in their exit strategies.
And that's what Dave Ramsey would say, that you're not planning together, right? That you're not planning to be together, and that's to have any success with this kind of program. You do have to be united. You do have to. I mean, and that's not to say that's like checking. Like he has his retirement because he's an individual employed by, with his own employment. I had, my own retirement. What I had. So it's not talking about those kinds of accounts. It's talking strictly about your house paying checking account. Yeah, everyday living stuff. Yeah. Yes.
But there were plenty of people who had 2 separate accounts and they had 2 separate jobs, and they're married people who were they're
living together
would get their paychecks EFT to the separate accounts, and then they would get together and they would pay the household expenses. And even if they would even meet, and I get, they would then split up the bills. But what?
And that's not at all what either of these programs would advocate.
It's like you're sharing office space with a business partner. That, it's not like a marriage.
All I can say is I was grateful the day they came out with duplicate checks, because my husband would sometimes take the checkbook and go out, and sometimes he'd bring me the receipt, and sometimes he wouldn't. So when they had duplicate checks, I said, oh, thank God.
Yes, it is not without its challenges. It's not without its challenges to work together. But it's the spirit of being united and having that. So. So if you have anything else, I can close us in prayer. Okay. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, God, for this, again, for this time together this morning, for this opportunity to share about you and your desires for how we live out financial principles that you've given us in Scripture. I pray that we would keep with us the parts of these discussions that you know that we need, and help us to recall them and ponder them and live them out as you will it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you both.